Okay, Tron, I think you are good to go. If you're ready.
Living in a crypto world on fire, and I got my Ravencoin. I know we can fly so high, Raven. We got our feet on the ground, and we're burning it down. Oh, Raven. We got our head in the clouds, and we're not coming down. This coin is on fire. Ravencoin is on fire. This coin is on fire. Ravencoin is on fire. Looks like the girl, but it's a play. So bright it can burn your eyes. Get ready to tonight. You can try, but you'll never forget its day. They want the nicotine. Everybody sing with me, say Raven.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tron Black. That song, if you could hear it through the microphone, was by Ravencoin Girl. There's a whole series of songs she's created, part of the Ravencoin community. My name's Tron Black. I am a principal developer for Medici Ventures, which is division of Overstock.com. And then I'm also the lead dev for Ravencoin. So today, I'm going to be talking about communications using a branded asset. So KAAAWWW is the name of the presentation. So what this is basically linking a token, a unique token name, to communication, digital communication of any type, and what you can do with that. So for this, we need just a little bit of background on trust, anchoring, communication, and then 3 features of Ravencoin, some messaging features, and then I'll jump into a few use cases. Some are real, some made up, and some that are just meant to inspire ideas. Let me start with the trust anchor. So anchoring for Bitcoin is the Genesis block. So this is the first block in Bitcoin, and everything is linked to that. So it started with on January 9th or January 3rd of 2009. And from there, every block's been built on that. For Litecoin and Raven, same thing. There's a Genesis block, different chains, different Genesis block, but that's the trust anchor. Everything goes back to that. For Ravencoin assets, it's slightly different. So you create the trust anchor, and this is a unique token that you create. The token name has to be unique, and Ravencoin will make sure that that's happened. Just kind of by the way of background, none of this is actually Raven specific in the sense that you couldn't do this on, let's say, a smart contract. It's just that all the facilities have kind of been built into Ravencoin. So it'll have some Ravencoin specifics in it. But you create a token, you make up your own token name, you burn 500 Raven, which is somewhere about around $11 right now, and you get your own token. This token moves just like Bitcoin. You can transfer it, you have a private key, you sign transactions, etc. So this is the trust anchor for what we're talking about today, is anchoring to a unique token name. So let's talk about trust for a minute, and trust especially in digital communication. So for websites, we have HTTPS. So that protocol, HTTPS, will encrypt the traffic, but it could encrypt the traffic to a bad guy. So you need to know who you're talking to and make sure the person you're talking to or the website you're talking to is who they say they are. And that's where SSL certificates come in. So that's where somebody like VeriSign or something like that signs a certificate that says they are Google, they are, we've seen their corporate documents, et cetera. So that's SSL certificates for websites. For Twitter, we have the blue check mark, and that's so that somebody like Elon Musk can have a blue check mark, so you know it's kind of the real Elon Musk and not somebody just pretending to be that and saying, hey, we're doing a Bitcoin giveaway or something like that, right? So you got the trust there. For TV news brands, right? Doesn't mean that they're necessarily telling the truth, but each one of them have a brand. So you've got CNN, NBC, Fox, MSNBC, Newsmax, RT, Al Jazeera, OAN, all having a brand, right? So it doesn't mean, you know, we're not going to solve the problem of fake news here today, because you could create this brand and then still put out fake news, but it will all link back to that token. So the communication has a root anchor that you have. And the same thing with online news, right? You have New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, right? You may or may not trust these. You know, they sometimes say opposite things. I'm not going to get into that, and we're not going to solve that problem. But they all do have, you know, articles and things in these do have a brand, and all link back to that publisher. And so we are going to be able to do that, link this back to a token. So token is a brand. So linking the token with communication, right? So the token is the brand. So this unique token that you create is the brand. And the communication will be anchored to that brand. And this will be digital signatures and cryptography linked to this brand. And one thing that it has that some of the other options that we just talked about, including Twitter, including news stations, including websites, don't have, is that it will be tamper-proof and censorship resistant. By tamper-proof, I mean you cannot change the content. Someone can't change the content at all. And then censorship resistant in the sense that you're not going to have somebody say, well, I don't like this content, so we're just going to take it down. And that's because it's distributed. So all of the communication that we're talking about is digitally signed. It uses the same digital signature that sends your Bitcoin. So this is your private key, and it's the same private key that you had when you issued the token. You issued the token to your address, and you have a private key that no one else has that'll allow you to communicate and attach it to this token. And then this is probably the most important part, IPFS. If you haven't heard of it, you should look this up. This slide deck will be available later to anyone who wants it. And this link will take you there. But if you want to, you can just go to ipfs.io, and that'll take you to this technology, Interplanetary File System. So IPFS doesn't actually store your files, but it's a system to make sure that your files aren't tampered with and that can be globally distributed. And it has this couple of really unique features, really interesting features, and that is the content that you put in there is addressed by the content. So it gives you back a hash, and that hash is the reference to the data. So if the data changed for whatever reason, because somebody changed the IPFS software or whatever, it wouldn't match anymore. And so by taking the content, the hash, and putting that in the Ravencoin blockchain and not being able to tamper with it, or it wouldn't reference that actual file, you have this immutable link. And so we used it for the metadata initially, and I'll explain metadata in a minute. Metadata for the tokens initially in Ravencoin, and it was so popular we've extended that out so that you can put this information in with every transaction, and that activated earlier this year. So the token transaction, every token transaction, it would include this IPFS hash that goes in the chain, and then you can link to the data. And the data can be anything. I'll explain that in a minute. So let me jump to Ravencoin assets. There's, I think, 6 types, but I'm only going to talk about 3 types here. So there's a root asset. The root asset, here's one example, my_voice. It must be unique, meaning you create it if it's not unique, just like a domain name, right? So if someone already has it, you can't get it. And the Ravencoin blockchain will actually sort this out, right? So the first one to grab it will get it, and then no one else can have it, and it sorts all that out. So that's root assets. They cost 500 Raven, and those Raven are burned, so nobody gets them. They just, it's part of the tokenomics. Some of the Raven are just gone off the market. And then sub assets. So if you own, let's say, my voice, then you can create my voice / anything else you want. This, you know, collectively, this whole thing needs to be unique, but it means you can get any name like this, right? So here's an example of blog. These are 100 Raven, and those 100 Raven are burned, and then you own that token as well. And then we have unique assets, and they're set apart by having a hashtag in the middle. They start with a root asset. So somebody who had Spock, for example, and put a hashtag, and then they can put anything they want. And if there's a hashtag in it, there's only ever one of these. So we call them unique assets, but you've also heard of them as NFTs or Nifties. They're just non-fungible tokens. and guaranteed that there's only one of these. So these are the three different types that we're going to talk about. What was interesting is when I was creating this presentation with this idea of linking tokens to communication and putting that in IPFS, the communication in IPFS, and having it be immutable and uncensorable, et cetera. Someone else actually created this My Voice token and this My Voice/blog token and actually published a PDF. So that's available. You can go see it through our Explorer. There'll be some links at the end of this. It'll let you get to our Explorer, et cetera. But you can actually go see what they published. Doesn't mean you'll appreciate what they published, but that it kind of doesn't matter. That's not, Ravencoin doesn't care what you publish. It's just a technology. So let me talk about three different types of data that you can publish. So Ravencoin metadata. Oh, when you publish the data is all the same thing. It's files or folders, right? So all three of these are going to be files or folders, which means they can be anything. But the way it's associated or the way it's linked into the Ravencoin token is a little bit different. So Ravencoin metadata, the data is associated with a token. So it usually means, what is this token about? What is this token for? What does it represent? And so you can put that information in there. And so some of the examples would be like a deed to a property. If the token represented, each token represented a share of the property, you basically say that in the metadata. Or it could be a PDF about what the token represents. It could be a folder of files for a static website. Someone's actually put an entire website in this, and you can actually just jump to the whole website with multiple files, and that's because the data can actually be a folder of files in IPFS, so that gets linked. There's an example of that. It can be JSON formatted data with attributes. So JSON's easily readable by computers and can have like this, tag equals data. So you can put that in there. You can put in a photo or a movie. People have put in lots of photos and lots of movies in through this system. And there's a reason that works, and that's because IPFS stores the data and the chain just stores the hash to the data. So you're not really bloating the chain. And then just one person or multiple people, since they all have the same name, can store this file. And the more people that use the file and download the file, the better it gets. So that's another kind of neat feature about IPFS. The other type is Ravencoin messages. And so this message is data sent by the token issuer. So whoever created or issued the token gets a special token, kind of an admin token. And if they send that token back to themselves and include an IPFS hash, then it's from the token issuer, because they're the only ones that would have that token. There could only be one of those admin tokens. So they would be the holder of that. So you can do different things with this. One of the main purposes we had originally for it, and it's kind of, now there's lots of different use cases, but one of them is to notify token holders about, let's say, a vote. So you wanted to vote something about, for all the holders of your token, you could do that. So one thing it's basically doing is proving that you are the token issuer, right? Because you're sending the admin token. And then another use case, we'll talk about this one a little bit, is you could create a blog or news that's provably published by the token issuer, right? So that's kind of, subject to this topic, or the subject of this message. So Ravencoin memos, these are the cheap, inexpensive ones. Any transaction that's made by anybody who holds a token, you could send the token to yourself, send it to your buddy, anything, you can now include an IPFS hash, and that was activated, like I said, earlier this year. So this is a fairly new feature within Ravencoin, but it's any transaction you could include them. You don't have to include one, but you can. So you could publish the cost basis of the token. You could publish any public information that anyone can read. You can publish encrypted information so that only people who have the password or private key can read it. You can basically publish anything linked to a token transaction. So you can do lots of these, right? And anybody who has the tokens can publish. And that's built in now. Okay, so I'm going to collect all these features together, all the things that we've talked about. And so these are the features needed to do this communication thing. So these are the key features. You need a guaranteed unique token name. The reason you need that is your brand. So if you had a token that someone could copy it, right, and make it the same token name, right, then they wouldn't know it was from you. So the important part is that there's only one token of that name. So the other thing you need is immutable data linked to the token. That's what Ravencoin and IPFS collectively provide. You need unlimited data. So you need the ability to put in lots of data. So IPFS is providing that infrastructure. and it's providing it off chain. So these movies aren't going on chain, so it's not making these terabyte size blockchains. And then so that you can do things with, you can link it directly to the token name, you can link it directly to the token owner, token issuer, or you can link it to any token transaction, right? So those are the three different types within Ravencoin that you can do, and you can do all three. And then you want it distributed and uncensorable, right? So this gives it kind of a unique thing and makes it, while it may not be as efficient, it does have the ability, especially in these days where people have been canceled or deplatformed, et cetera. You have a platform that basically just allows you to do this, and it's just a technology. It's just out there, it's distributed, allows you to do this. So what do these features make possible? What are the use cases? What can we do with this new feature set, right? What is possible? So the rest of the presentation is basically that. It's just some examples. Some of them are real life examples, some of them are in use, some of them are just made up, and some of them are just kind of designed to kind of like fire the imagination. So one example would be a DNS system, right? A non-censorable DNS system. So if you're familiar with kind of the poker, poker sites were shut down by the government here, and I'm sure lots of websites in other countries are shut down by governments, et cetera, because the DNS system is relatively centralized, and so all you have to do is go kind of yank that, shut off the IP, and then you can't get to the website anymore. So you can build a DNS that's uncensorable. So here's an example, right? So this in the vernacular of Ravencoin, you have a root token here, com / and then a sub token, right? And that would represent Amazon.com. And then the metadata that goes in the IPFS would be the records that say these are the IP addresses for all the Amazon.com servers. And then you can extend that further because Ravencoin allows sub tokens, right? So you could do root token, sub asset, or sub token, and that would represent prime.amazon.com, same thing, right? So the IP addresses would be published in IPFS and would go directly to the servers. Blog publishing. So here's just another example. We kind of alluded to this one earlier. So, this one's being done. So this was, I actually had different tokens here in my original presentation when I wrote it. And then because someone had actually done it, I just switched to their tokens to kind of show this as an example. So basically a token, my voice blog, right? And so any information that's published on that is published. If it's published with the admin private key, meaning using messages, then it's coming from the person that created this. But then they could also send tokens, blog tokens, to a bunch of people, and they could publish memos, which would come from anybody who's given the blog token. So in the case of messages, all the messages are public and time-stamped on chain, and that's because Ravencoin creates blocks every minute. So the transaction goes on a block. The block is time-stamped every minute. So you have a timestamp for every transaction. And those transactions would contain the links to this IPFS, which then links that together. So now we have freedom of speech and freedom of press guaranteed globally just by technology. So technology is providing this just as, kind of as a service. Certificate of authenticity, I alluded to this one earlier. So this would be a root token, SPOC, and then you create a unique asset, right? So you put a hashtag and then any text you want in here. And then the metadata would be like a photo or a PDF of this item, right? So this thing, just to uniquely distinguish it, right? It would have a serial number on it or be signed or something like that. And then when the ownership of this item, this physical item gets transferred, then you would also transfer the digital twin, which would be this token. So ownership changes are recorded in Memos to document a chain of custody for any item. So as that item gets sold and moves around, you would send the digital twin with it. And you couldn't counterfeit this digital twin because there's only one of them, and whoever created it started it. And so as it moves around, you can't create another one, and Ravencoin will kind of make sure that that can't happen. So here's a fictional example, right? So a fictional global news network, GNN. So they would start with a root token, right? So the root branding, right? They can publish under that directly, or they're the only ones that could create the sub assets of GNN News, GNN Opinion, GNN Facts, etc. Right? And so they could publish under those, right? So opinion pieces, verifiable facts and sources. Again, this is just a made up example. You could even create unique tokens for each reader, and so they would be able to publish effectively anonymously, but tied to their tokens. This would be a little bit like a Twitter handle, for example. They could publish under that, reader comments, etc., and you kind of get to know their content, but not necessarily know exactly who they are. So this is just a kind of a fictional example, but definitely possible. So here's another example. So transparent record keeping. So airplanes, they get a tail number, and that tail number typically stays with the aircraft for its lifetime, even as it changes owners. A little bit like a VIN number on a car. And you can do the same thing, same idea here with a VIN number of a car. But basically, you include all the records, all the maintenance records, et cetera, for the tail number for that aircraft. So this is a root token. This would be a unique token for each aircraft, and that tail number token would just be sent back to the owner of the aircraft, right? So they own it, they send it to themselves, but then include PDFs, documents, pictures, photos, things like that for the aircraft, right? With any additional records, and they would just be time stamped, and you could record as many of those as necessary for the aircraft, and that information, all the records, would be public and time stamped to the minute and immutable, so you couldn't change them kind of after the fact. You could add additionally, you could add addendums, you could add corrections, but you couldn't change the sequence. So we talked a lot about this, and a lot of information, of course, is public because the blockchain's public, because IPFS is public, all this information is public. So what's the solution if you want private information, private records? And the solution is encryption. There's some articles of that on Medium, and there's a link to that at the end of this. But there's a couple different types of encryption you can do. Two major types: symmetric, asymmetric. Symmetric, you just create a password. You put the data in this, publish the data through IPFS and the token, and then you give the password to anybody you want to read it, and you just have one copy. You give the password to 20 people if you wanted to. Asymmetric, a little bit different. You basically encrypt with someone else's public key, and they have the private key, and then they're the only ones that can decrypt it. So for that, you would need to potentially store it multiple times. And so that's asymmetric encryption. And then how do you know what their public key is and things like that? There's actually Raven Improvement Proposal number 11, done by Mango Farm, and it's a spec for both how to encrypt the data and then also how to publish your public key on chain so that other people can get it and send to you without necessarily knowing who you are, but ensuring that only you would be able to decrypt the data. So that's kind of built in. So that's RIP 11. And that's it. So in conclusion, Ravencoin's a publishing platform for immutable time-stamped information of any type, right? Any file type, et cetera. You can put that in there. And then because of the fact that you can link all of this to a token, and it's digitally signed by the token holder or the token sender, you can build trust in a brand in that unique token name that only you have access to or that you've given access to. And all the records can be linked to that unique token, so it can be a publishing system. So that is the end. So I have time for questions and answers. They'll hopefully shut me up when the time is over. And so if anybody has questions, I'm ready to take them.
Tron, this is Christina. If Dustin Minch, our head of mining intelligence, could be here, he would ask you to explain the recent upgrade that you did to make mining easier for the mid-tier equipment versus the highest tier equipment. Yep.
Okay, sure. So for people who aren't familiar with Ravencoin, one of the initial goals, we did change the mining algorithm from Bitcoin to be able to keep it. What we're really trying to do is keep it democratic and kind of available to everyone. So goal is that somebody with a gaming rig can flip it on at night and make some Raven. And we had that for quite a while. In fact, you could run it on a computer for about the first month, and then on GPUs for about the first year. And then somebody did finally make kind of a custom machine that was a little bit more efficient, a little bit better at mining. And so it made it harder, not impossible, but harder for people who had GPUs. Just gaming rigs, right, with a graphics card, NVIDIA or AMD graphics cards, to earn Raven. It made it tougher, right? And so there was a kind of request that, hey, we'd like to go back to this thing where we can just flip on our own machines at night and make Raven. And so we did switch to switched over to another algorithm. At the time, this was about a month ago, so pretty much state of the art in terms of an algorithm that uses as much as possible of a GPU, which means to create a custom machine that competes with it, you'd be essentially creating a GPU, which would be not very cost effective. So it's the algorithm's derivative of ethash or progpow with the derivative ethash, and we've renamed it KAAAWWW with our tweaks in it. And so that's what we upgraded to about a month ago.
Awesome. And now that I have unmuted the audience and they can ask their questions, I will turn Q&A over to them.
If anybody has any questions, these are the links, just some links. Again, this slide deck will be available. If you want to know more about Ravencoin, the top link, Ravencoin Wiki kind of spreads out to lots of different things and community things and videos and music and stuff about Ravencoin and history and all kinds of things. And then I write on Medium, and then several different people write on the blog here. So those are just resources available. Any questions at all? Let's stand here awkwardly.
I really want to pick on Michael Holdman to ask you some questions. Jonathan Kym also, Dominic, Ben, Christian is coming up here in about 3 minutes. So Tron, you have 3 minutes to tell the audience anything that you find absolutely critical for them to know about Ravencoin.
Oh gosh. So one thing I didn't get into at all, because I was kind of focused on this communication thing, is kind of the higher level, broader overview. So Ravencoin was a derivative of, was a code fork, not a chain fork, of Bitcoin. And then we added an asset layer. So if you're familiar with open assets or colored coins or counterparty, we basically built that into Ravencoin. So you can create your own asset. And it's all built in. And there's explorers out there that support it. And there's wallets for Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android, web. If you're just storing Raven, the coin, there's tons of wallets. I mean, it's in Coinomi and all the multi-coin wallets. But its real focus is on this asset creation. And with that asset creation, we linked the assets. People needed to know what those assets were about. And we linked it to the metadata, and that went in IPFS, so they could publish an entire video about what their asset was for. And that feature became so popular that people wanted it for every transaction, so they could just publish information. Because really all it's doing is storing a short string that links to IPFS. But because those two are so tightly linked through this hash, you can't change one or the other. It becomes immutable data in the chain. And so that was a super popular feature, and we've extended it. And because we have extended it, and then all kinds of new things were possible, that's what this presentation was about. Did that use my whole 3 minutes?
Yes, sir. We are right at the top of the time here. Thank you so much.
Right.
We really appreciated it, Coin Genius, for you to join us here and tell us about Ravencoin. We are big fans. We watch the performance in the market. We are obviously watching the mining side of it. I mentioned to you that we tend to bring you up in our Genius Wednesday calls. I'd love to have you come on and kind of hear what our team has to say about your project.
I'd love to do that. And
Excellent.
Thanks everybody for listening. I appreciate your time, and thank you, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Give
you.
our best
Bye-bye.
to everyone at Ravencoin.
Will do. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Excellent. All right. Well.